My husband and stepdaughter pushed me to raise her baby, so I made them regret the pressure. Not with cruelty, with compliance. I said yes. And the yes was the thing that terrified them more than any no could have, because the yes came with conditions, and the conditions were the mirror, and the mirror showed them exactly what they were asking for, and the asking looked different when the asked for was granted. My stepdaughter Becca is 19. She is pregnant, 7 months. The father is a boy named Jake, who has the emotional maturity of a fortune cookie, and the financial stability of a fortune cookie, and the presence in Becca's life that matches the permanence of a fortune cookie, which is to say he was opened, read, and discarded in the time it takes to finish a meal. My husband Richard sat me down 3 weeks ago. Becca was on the couch. They had clearly rehearsed. Richard on my left, Becca on my right, me in the center. The center is where targets sit in interventions, and interventions are what you call it when two people have decided what you're going to do, and the deciding happened before you sat down. Richard said, "We need to talk about what happens when the baby comes." I said, "Becca has a plan, right?" Becca looked at Richard. Richard looked at Becca. The looking was the script failing. Richard said, "Becca is going to stay in school. She's going back in January. The baby is due in December." I said, "That's a good plan. Who's watching the baby while she's in class?" Richard said, "That's what we wanted to talk about." I knew. Before the sentence finished, I knew, because the knowing lives in the silence between "we wanted to talk about" and the name the silence contains, and the name is mine because the name is always mine when the conversation involves labor that nobody else wants to perform. Richard said, "We were hoping you could be home with the baby during the day while Becca is in class." I said, "You want me to quit my job?" He said, "Not quit, take a leave." I said, "I'm a project manager. My company doesn't offer leave for step-grandchildren. This would be quitting." Becca said, "It's only for a semester." I said, "A semester is 4 months. 4 months of no income. 4 months of no career progression. 4 months of full-time infant care performed by a person who is not the mother, not the grandmother, and not the father. 4 months of a job that nobody else in this room is willing to do, offered to the person in this room whose consent is being extracted through the word family, because family is the word that makes unpaid labor sound like love." Richard said, "That's not what this is." I said, "Then what is it?" He didn't answer. Becca didn't answer. I said, "Okay." They looked at me. Richard said, "Okay." I said, "I'll do it. I'll take the leave. I'll stay home. I'll raise the baby during the day. 4 months. Becca smiled. Richard exhaled. I said, "But I have conditions." The smiling stopped. I said, "Condition 1. I make every parenting decision during my care hours. Feeding schedule, sleep schedule, routine, my house, my rules. If I'm the full-time caregiver, I am the full-time authority. Becca does not override my decisions during her class hours because Becca is in class, and class is where she chose to be, and the choosing means the authority transfers to the person in the room." Becca said, "I'm the mother." I said, "You're the mother who is in a lecture hall. I'm the adult in the house. The baby follows the adult in the house." Condition 2. Richard shares the overnight duties, 50-50. The baby sleeps in our room until Becca's semester ends. Not in Becca's room where Becca won't hear it because Becca is exhausted from classes, and the exhaustion produces a mother who sleeps through feeding times, and the sleeping through means the feeding falls to the person whose room is closest. Richard is going to participate in the overnight because the overnight is the part nobody mentioned during the rehearsal, because the rehearsal was about the daytime, and the daytime was my job, and the nighttime was supposed to be invisible. And invisible labor is the kind that women perform in houses where men sleep through it. Richard said, "I have work in the morning." I said, "I have a 4-month unpaid leave that starts when the baby arrives. If I'm sacrificing income, you're sacrificing sleep. That's the exchange." Condition 3. Becca does all parenting from 4 p.m. Friday to 8 a.m. Monday. Every weekend. No exceptions. No, I have plans. No, I need a break. The weekends belong to the mother, because the mother is the parent, and the parent is the person who does the parenting. And the parenting includes the inconvenient hours, and the inconvenient hours are the weekends, and the weekends are the test. Becca said, "Every weekend?" I said, "Every weekend. For 4 months. The same 4 months I'm giving up my career progression for. The weekends are your investment in the arrangement. My investment is my salary. Your investment is your Saturdays." They looked at each other. The looking was the first time since the intervention that the looking contained doubt. Richard said, "This feels like a punishment." I said, "This feels like a plan. Your original proposal was a staffing model in which I do everything and everyone else does nothing, and the nothing is called being supportive, and the everything is called being family. My conditions make the plan equitable. If the equitable version feels like punishment, the punishment was in your original proposal. You just put it on me instead of on yourselves." Becca left the room. Richard sat on the couch for a long time. He said, "What if Becca doesn't want the conditions?" I said, "Then Becca finds daycare, because daycare costs $1,200 a month, and $1,200 a month is the price of the thing you were asking me to do for $0, and the 0 is what you valued my time at." Becca came back the next day. She said, "I'll take the conditions." The baby came 3 weeks early. Becca called from the hospital on a Tuesday afternoon, and her voice was shaking. In the delivery waiting room, Richard reached over and took my hand. He held it the way people hold things they're afraid of losing, not tight but steady, and he said, "Thank you for doing this. I know what you gave up." For that moment, I thought, okay, maybe this family can do this. The baby was born at 9:47 that night, a boy. The first week home was chaos, but it was functional chaos. I took the daytime shifts and I built a system because systems are what I do. I I am a project manager. I made a feeding schedule. I made a nap routine. I tracked every bottle, every diaper, every sleep window in the Google Doc. The Google Doc became the brain of the arrangement. Richard did his first 2 overnight shifts. He was tired. He was slow to get up, but he got up. Becca took her first weekend shift. She was shaky. She called me twice on Saturday and I answered. All 3 conditions were holding. The system was working. Then the cracks began. Night 4. It was Richard's night. The baby started screaming at 2 a.m. I nudged Richard. He groaned. I nudged him again, harder this time. He rolled toward me and said, I have a presentation at 8. Can you just do this one? And I said, the condition is 50-50. This is your night. He lay there for a few seconds. The seconds were the thing I noticed because the seconds were the space between being asked and doing the thing, and the space was filled with something I recognized. It was the calculation. He got up, but the silence between the nudge and the getting up was the first crack, and the crack was small, but cracks don't stay small. By week 2, Richard started sleeping through the alarm. Tuesday night, his alarm went off at 1:47 a.m. The baby was fussing. I waited 3 minutes. Nothing. I shook his shoulder. He opened his eyes and said, I didn't hear it. I said, you heard it. You turned it off. The phone log shows the alarm was dismissed at 1:47 a.m. You dismissed it and rolled over. He didn't say anything. I got up and handled the feeding myself that night, but I logged it. I opened the Google Doc at 2:14 a.m. and I typed, Richard scheduled overnight. Alarm dismissed at 1:47 a.m. Richard did not wake. Protagonist handled feeding. Logged as missed shift. End of week 2. Friday, 4 p.m. Becca's first full Friday to Monday weekend shift. I had the baby fed, changed, and dressed. Becca came downstairs at 4 p.m. exactly. I handed her the baby. I handed her the schedule. I handed her the monitor. She took all 3 and then she looked at me and said, can you just stay nearby in case I need help? I said, the condition is that the weekends are yours. Nearby means available means doing it for you. I'll be upstairs. I turned and walked upstairs. I went into the bedroom. I closed the door. And I sat on the edge of the bed in total silence for the first time in 14 days. Saturday morning, 6 a.m. The baby started crying. I lay there and I timed it. Not because I'm cruel, because the timing is the data and the data is the thing that tells me whether the conditions are working. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3, 4, 5. I could hear movement downstairs, footsteps, the sound of Becca's voice, but the voice wasn't solving the problem. 6 minutes, 7, 8, 9. At minute 10, Becca knocked on the bedroom door. Her breathing was fast and scared. The kind of breathing that happens when you're 19 and the baby won't stop and the stopping feels like it's supposed to be automatic and the automatic isn't working. She said, the baby won't stop. I don't know what's wrong. And I could have opened the door. I could have walked downstairs and taken the baby and fixed it in 2 minutes. But the fast would have stolen something from Becca. The fast would have stolen the learning, and the learning is the thing that turns a scared 19-year-old into a mother who knows what to do at 6 a.m. when the baby won't stop. So I stayed behind the closed door and I said, check the diaper, then try feeding, then hold him against your chest and walk. Becca went back downstairs. 4 minutes later, the crying stopped. Becca figured it out. She figured it out without me in the room. I opened the Google Doc on my phone. I typed, Becca solved night feeding independently, Saturday 6:14 a.m. That entry mattered more than every violation I had logged, because the violation entries are proof that the system is being tested, and the success entries are proof that the system is working. Sunday night, Richard pulled me aside in the hallway outside our bedroom. He said, Becca is crying in her room. She says this is too hard. I said, it is hard. That's what parenting is. The hardness is not a flaw in the plan. The hardness is the plan. Richard's tone changed. The concern left and something harder moved in. He said, you sound like you're punishing her. I said, I sound like a person enforcing the conditions you agreed to. If the conditions sound like punishment, the problem is not the conditions. The problem is that you expected me to abandon them the moment they became inconvenient for Becca. You expected me to fold. I am not folding. He walked away. That evening, my phone rang. It was Primrose, my best friend, the person who has known me long enough to hear the difference between my fine voice and my actually fine voice. I told her everything. When I finished, she said, you know Richard is going to try to renegotiate. He's going to wait until you're tired and then frame the renegotiation as compassion. I said, I know. She said, so what's your plan? I said, the plan is the Google Doc. Everything is documented. Every overnight Richard missed. Every weekend Becca completed. Every condition met or broken. The document is the plan because the document is the proof, and the proof is the thing that prevents the renegotiation from becoming a rewrite of history. Primrose was quiet for a second, and then she said, good. The next morning, I opened the Google Doc to log the start of the new week, and there it was. Richard had added a comment. The comment was attached to the overnight schedule, and it read, can we discuss adjusting the overnight split to weekends only? Weeknight overnights are affecting my work performance. I stared at it. He didn't ask me. He didn't bring it up in person. He wrote it in the Google Doc like a policy proposal, like the conditions were a contract he could amend through comments. I took a screenshot. I saved it to my phone. I saved it to my email. Then I typed my response directly under his comment. The conditions were agreed to before the baby arrived. Adjustments require mutual agreement. This is not a mutual agreement. This is a unilateral request disguised as a comment. I saved it. I closed the laptop. Primrose was right. The renegotiation had started. Week 3. Becca's semester starts in 10 days. Friday, 4 p.m. I was downstairs with the baby. Everything was ready for the handoff. handoff because the handoff is 4 p.m. on Friday, and 4 p.m. on Friday is the start of Becca's shift. 4 p.m., no Becca. 4:05, no Becca. 4:10, I could hear music coming from her room upstairs. 4:15, no Becca. At 4:22, I picked up the baby. I walked upstairs. I stood in front of Becca's door and I knocked. Becca opened the door. She was on the phone. She looked at me and she mouthed the words, "1 second." I did not wait 1 second. I said out loud, not whispering, but speaking in my full voice so that whoever was on the other end of that phone could hear it too. "It's 4:22. Your shift started 22 minutes ago. The baby is yours." I placed the baby in her arms. I turned around and walked away. That night I was at the counter washing bottles. Richard came in. He leaned against the wall and his posture was the posture of a man who has been building a sentence in his head for hours. He said, "You can't just hand the baby off like a package." I turned off the water. I dried my hands. I looked at him. I said, "I handed the baby to his mother at the start of her scheduled parenting time. That is not handing off a package. That is parenting beginning on schedule. The schedule is the agreement. The agreement is the conditions. The conditions are the only reason I am standing here instead of sitting in my office earning the salary I gave up for this arrangement." Then he said something that stopped me. He said, "Becca told me she doesn't want to come home on weekends anymore. She wants to stay at her friend's place." I put the towel down. I put it down slowly. I said, "Becca has a baby. The baby lives here. Becca's weekends are with the baby. If Becca wants to stay at a friend's place, Becca takes the baby to the friend's place. The baby is not a houseplant that gets watered when it's convenient. The baby is a person who requires a parent, and the parent on weekends is Becca." That was condition 3. Then Richard said, "I told her she could skip this weekend." The ground tilted. I said, "You told her she could skip the weekend?" He said, "She's stressed about school starting." I said, "You overrode the conditions without asking me." He shifted his weight, and the shifting was the body language of a man who knows he did the thing, but has already constructed a version of the thing that makes the thing reasonable. He said, "I'm her father. I made a call." I said, "You're my husband. You made an agreement. The agreement was with me. The call you made was a breach of the agreement. You don't get to unilaterally waive conditions that cost me my income, my sleep, and my career. You made a call. The call was wrong." He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just stood there with the expression of a man who expected the call to be absorbed the way all his other calls have been absorbed, quietly, by a woman who adjusts. But I am not absorbing this one. I left. I went into the bedroom. I picked up my phone and I called Primrose. I said, "He went behind my back. He told Becca she could skip weekends." Primrose was quiet for exactly one breath, and then she said, "So now you know. He was never going to hold the line. He was going to wait until it got hard, and then quietly dismantle the conditions one by one and hope you wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight." I said, "I noticed, and I'm going to fight, but not the way he expects." After I hung up, I opened my laptop. I opened the Google Doc. I added a new section at the bottom. I titled it Condition Violations Log, and under that title I typed, Week 3, Friday. Richard unilaterally waived Becca's weekend parenting responsibility without mutual agreement. Becca absent for scheduled shift. Violation of Condition 3. I saved it. I copied the link. I opened my email. I pasted the link into a new message addressed to Richard. I did not write a subject line. I did not write a greeting. I sent the link. Just the link. Because the link is the document, and the document is the proof, and the proof doesn't need a greeting. Richard saw the email. He came into the bedroom. He was holding his phone, and his face was the face of a person who has just been shown a photograph of themselves that they did not pose for. He said, "You're keeping a violation log against my daughter?" I said, "Against the agreement. The agreement doesn't belong to Becca. It belongs to all 3 of us, and you broke it." He stared at me. He said, "This is insane. You're treating our family like a contract negotiation." I said, "You turned it into a contract negotiation when you sat me down with your daughter in a rehearsed intervention and asked me to quit my job. You made it a negotiation. I just showed up prepared." He started pacing. Then he found the door he was looking for. He said, "Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe we should just find daycare." I said, "Then find daycare." I gave up my leave already. The leave has been submitted. My position is held for 4 months. If you want daycare, you pay for it. $1,200 a month. And you explain to Becca why the free option disappeared. And the explanation is that the free option had conditions, and the conditions required you to be a parent and a partner, and you chose to be neither. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, not next to me, on the other side, and I watched the anger leave him. It left the way air leaves a tire, slow and steady until the shape changes. He said quietly, "I didn't think it would be this hard." I said, "You didn't think it would be this hard for you. You thought it would be this hard for me, and you were fine with that." The silence that followed was long. Then Richard said, "You're right. I was fine with that. I didn't even think about what I was asking you to give up. I just thought, Becca needs this, and you're here, and you're capable, and capable people do the thing. I didn't think about what the thing costs." I said, "The thing costs exactly what the conditions describe. The conditions aren't punishment. They're the price, and you didn't want to pay your share." He didn't answer. He lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The next morning, Becca came home. I was at the table feeding the baby when she walked in through the front door with her bag over her shoulder. She stood in the doorway and said, "Dad said I have to be here on weekends. He said you were right." I said, "I don't need to be right. I need you to be here. Your baby needs you to be here. The weekends are not about me winning. The weekends are about your child knowing that the person person who made him is the person who shows up. You can resent me for it now. That's fine. But the showing up is the thing that matters, and the mattering will outlast the resentment. Becca stood in that doorway for a long time. She didn't leave. She put her bag down on the floor. She walked over to where I was sitting and she reached out and took the baby from my arms. She didn't say anything. She just took the baby and sat down at the table and held him. That evening, Richard did his overnight shift. I didn't nudge him. I didn't set a second alarm. At 2 a.m., I heard him in the hallway, pacing slow and steady, and I heard him humming something, low and soft, the kind of sound that a man makes when he is holding a baby in the dark, and the dark is the place where no one is watching, and the not watching means the doing is real, because the doing is not for an audience. The doing is for a baby who needs to be held, and a man who is finally doing the holding. I lay in bed and I listened. I did not get up. Becca's semester started. The arrangement continued. The Google Doc grew, page after page of feedings and naps and shifts completed, and the violation log stayed short after week 3 because the conditions were being met. Richard did his overnights, Becca did her weekends, I did my weekdays. I returned to work after 4 months. My position was waiting. My career resumed. Becca finished her semester with a 3.2 GPA. The baby is healthy. Richard still hums in the hallway at 2 a.m. on his nights. I still document everything in the Google Doc, not because I don't trust them, because the document is the proof that love and labor can exist in the same sentence, but only when the sentence includes conditions, and the conditions are honored, and the honoring is the love.